Okay, so this is my keto gravy recipe made with almond flour. The ingredients for it is going to be butter. I use salted. If you don't use salted, you can just add more salt. Whipping cream, salt, pepper, almond flour, and then I use a pizza spice mix, but you can use any spice mix that you like. And it's very important that you have a whisk when you do this. And we'll go ahead and start.
The entire batch is only about 3 grams of carbs. And why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Hafsa,
Okay.
and we're gonna start. So I turn the heat on. You're gonna use a pan, not a pot. If you do this in a pot, it won't thicken properly. So I'm gonna put it on the highest heat, and I have 4 tablespoons of butter here. And then we just let that melt. While that's melting, we'll mix up our almond mixture. So, 1/3 cup of almond flour. You want to level it out. And then we're going to do half a teaspoon of black pepper, also leveled out. And then we're going to do 1/4 teaspoon of salt. If you have unsalted butter, you're going to do half a teaspoon, not a 1/4. And then I'm going to do a full teaspoon of the pizza seasoning mix. You don't have to mix it together, you just need it in one place. It's going to mix together when we put it in here.
So let's take a look at those ingredients. So heavy cream, almond flour,
So you want to come with
this
this
pizza
butter
seasoning.
here. It's completely melted, no chunks. You don't want it browned, so you want it just melted like this. And then we're going to put our almond flour in right away. You want to stir that around, make sure it's all incorporated. Make sure all of the almond flour has been immersed in the butter, and try to use your whisk to break up any clumps. Almond flour doesn't clump like regular flour, so it's not too hard to get clumps out. And then this part can burn very quickly, so this is when I lower my heat. I'm going to lower to medium low.
What was it on before?
It was on high. And now we're going to let it brown a little bit. So you can see it's already pretty brown, but you want some of those lighter sides, lighter edges to brown all the way. You do not want it to burn. So while that's browning, I'm going to measure out my whipping cream. So I have the same 1/3 cup I used for the almond flour. We're going to do 2 of those. So double the amount of the almond flour that you used, because this is going to cook down a lot. Okay, so that's 2/3 a cup of whipping cream. We're not putting it in yet. Okay, and we're gonna stir this. You wanna constantly be stirring this as soon as you're done measuring out your whipping cream, because this can burn very, very quickly. You want to make sure that it's flattened out and that every part of the flour is touching the bottom of the pan, because the clumps on top are not going to brown, which means it's not going to cook. You don't want your almond flour to taste raw. You want it to be cooked through. Give that another like 10 seconds or so. And you see that it's kind of bubbling up under. Okay. And then now I'm going to turn my heat up to medium high. We had it on medium low while it was cooking the almond flour. We're going to turn it up to medium high. Just give it one last stir. Kind of flatten out. And this part is very important. When you're putting the whipping cream in, you have to be stirring constantly or it will burn and you'll have clumps and you've ruined your gravy. I'm going to make sure you get all of the whipping cream in there. And then you want to stir. Constantly stir. You want to scrape the edges, you want to scrape the bottom. You have to have a whisk for this. Now, once that almond flour cooks, it can form clumps, so you have to break up the clumps again while you're stirring this. And this will thicken very quickly. It looks like it won't, but it will. So that's why you have to stir. If you stop stirring, it'll look like, oh, it's gonna get thick, but then it'll burn. So do not stop stirring this. And see that there's steam coming off. That's the water evaporating from the whipping cream. If you see that this is thin and not thickening after about a minute of this constant stirring on medium-high heat, you may not have put enough almond flour. At that point, you can add like a half a teaspoon of almond flour if you need to. More than likely though, it'll thicken up just the longer that it's on the heat. And you can see it's already thickening in the middle. We'll leave it for a second so you can see where it's bubbling up in the middle. That's where you can tell that it's going to start burning under there. That's why you have to stir in those areas. So you'll see it's not really liquid anymore. It's kind of thickening. But you still want to stir a little bit more. Now, depending on how thick you like it, you can stop at this point. Most people like it a little bit thicker because you can dip it in things, and when you warm this up again, the fat separates and it does melt a little bit and become liquidy. So I like to make it a tad bit thicker than this. So we'll go for maybe another 30 seconds. You're gonna be tempted to turn the heat up because it feels like the process is very long. Don't do that because it will burn. The cream will burn, the butter will burn, and you will not be able to eat it.
And you will burn.
And now it's done. So that's about as thick as it's gonna get, where you see that you're whisking it and the whole thing's kind of following your whisk. That means it's done. I'm gonna turn that off. And you do have to be careful because even after you turn it off, the pan is still hot, so it can still burn. So after you turn off the heat, you still wanna whisk for a few seconds. And that's it. There's your keto gravy. And this is usually good in the fridge for like a couple days. Just be careful when you're warming it up. It might kind of separate into the fat portions.
Best when eaten fresh.
Thank you.